For the last topic I'm going to discuss regarding taking our eyes off the ball, just to introduce you to this board I had made up. It's essentially the cover of the book that's been enlarged. This shows the back of the book. This is the front cover of the book. And I use this in book signings, and especially at these book signings I did after my son, the Marine, told me, you know, Dad, gun shows would be a great place to sell your book. So while I was still living in Virginia a few years ago, I started going to gun shows. And I met a vast cross-section of America at the various gun shows, principally in Virginia, that I attended over, say, 2 years period. And over that time, as I said, I met a cross-section of America, but over that time I found that there was one element on this book cover that drew the most comment, the most attention. And I'd like to bring that to your attention now. Just going to zoom in here. The last comment at the bottom says, our current adversaries are largely financed by a huge and complex narcotics trade. It is now time to reassess our strategy regarding the war on drugs from the demand side rather than the supply side. Okay, so you're probably wondering, what do I mean by all this? And up to this point we've been talking about the armed conflicts that we've been in since the end of World War II, and the fact that we haven't gotten a victory in any of them. All the while this has been going on, we've had another war that was unofficially declared. Congress didn't declare it, but the president, in 1971, President Nixon declared the war on drugs. For anyone that's been paying attention since 1971, the war is still going on, and if anything, it's less successful today than it was back in the 1970s. What do I mean by this comment? A large part of the conflicts today are being financed through narcotics sales and trade, and a lot of it's being funneled right back to organizations like Al-Qaeda and Taliban so that they can finance the war effort against us. So in effect, we're double paying. We're paying for our own forces to fight in places halfway around the world, such as Iraq and Afghanistan, while here at home and in Europe to a large extent, and in some other countries in the world to a lesser extent, the trafficking of narcotics, illegal drugs, is being purchased by the consumers in our own country. And so in effect it's another tax that we're paying, because that money is being funneled directly back to criminal elements that are supporting arms trade and the war against us. So there's been this kind of this merge with the Islamic terrorism and the jihadism, along with the illegal narcotics production and trade. When I was researching this book, one of the books I read at the Naval Academy had to do with the opium wars in China. And the fact that Britain had tried to impose opium on China as a way of kind of calming the masses so that Britain could expand its empire in China. And so they introduced opium, and the emperor of China eventually realized that this wasn't good for his people, and so he fought back against the British. Well, the British fought twice and won twice, and as a result, they demanded certain things in return for the Chinese fighting against the British, because the British were trying to impose opium on the Chinese. And one of the things that the British got out of the deal was Hong Kong, places like that. And the British hung on to it for 100 years, and probably during your lifetime you remember the transition of Hong Kong back to China in the late 1990s. Another thing that I found interesting is that to a large extent, narcotics, illegal narcotics, is a result largely of an attempt at commercializing these drugs by the British in the late 1800s. The British looked at opium and heroin as a great pain reliever. It was a legal substance in the late 1800s, and so they developed plantations, principally like in the India area and the outer reaches of the British Empire. And they refined the opium into this substance called heroin. And the word heroin is intentionally similar to the word heroine, as in a hero, a female hero. And heroin was this great savior to save people from pain. Well, after just a few years of heroin relieving pain in Europe, and Britain in particular, they found out that it was addictive. And so they attempted to put that genie back in the bottle, but it didn't work. And we've had heroin to a fairly constant degree ever since the British unleashed heroin. The only thing that's changed is that where heroin is manufactured, or where the opium poppies are grown, has migrated around. During the Vietnam War, it was grown in the Thailand area, the Golden Crescent it was called. And since the Vietnam War period, there's been a large crackdown by communists primarily in that region, and they pushed the growing of poppy to a place called Afghanistan. And Afghanistan today accounts for roughly 90 to 98% of the world heroin trade. And if you've been paying attention, heroin is a big problem in the world and in the United States. In fact, it's taken over from prescription drugs because it's becoming harder and harder to get prescription pain relievers. And so heroin has become easier to get, and it's less expensive than some of the synthetic opiates such as OxyContin. Anyway, another irony is that the expansion of heroin production in Afghanistan increased during our presence there over the last decade. What happened is the United States, with our big vehicles, we didn't have very good roads to get around in Afghanistan. And so we went in and our engineers built better paved roads. Well, what did this do? Well, it allowed us to get around more easily, but it also allowed bigger and better tanker trucks with chemicals for refining the opium into heroin to get into Afghanistan, so that now Afghanistan's can corner the market on not only the growth of the poppy seeds for the opium, but they can produce the refined heroin before it gets shipped out to the world market. Okay, so anyway, back to what I was saying about my friends at the gun shows. The people that commented on these things were FBI agents, police narcotics agents, and DEA agents that frequent. They're all arms carrying people, and they go to gun shows, and they nodded in agreement that we need to look at different ways of commission of the war on drugs, and that we need to look inward more than outward. rather than trying to get them to control the manufacture or the growth of the raw materials, places like Colombia and Afghanistan. We need to look at controlling the use of those materials in our own population. The other possibility is, and anyone who's been paying attention knows, and there's discussion about it right now in our national politics, is that a vast majority of our crime, our prison population, is centered around the use and trade of illegal drugs. There are civil wars going on in countries such as Mexico around drug trade. Colombia has recently taken on their drug production and to a large extent has controlled it to their credit. However, that drug trade just crossed the borders into Ecuador and Peru. So like with the heroin production initially in Thailand migrating to Afghanistan, it's migrated from Colombia to Peru and Ecuador. We haven't solved the problem. We haven't solved the demand. We still have this demand that's been in existence since the late 1800s. The only thing we've done is we've made it illegal. And my recommendation is that we look at success stories around the world. Switzerland, for instance, instead of treating illegal drugs as a criminal offense, they look at it as a public health issue that they're approaching successfully as a public health issue. What they're allowing to do is the government is able to control the quality and the safety of illegal drugs and needles, while at the same time getting these people who are addicted to these drugs into clinics where they can begin treatment and hopefully eventual cessation of use of that substance. What we've been doing since 1971 is every bit as much a failure as what we've done in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and we need to look at a different way. It's an extremely expensive endeavor for all states and for the federal government if we legalized, regulated, taxed, and controlled as a public health issue these illegal drugs. I think we might find it's a heck of a lot more effective for us, and it might, by changing the demand cycle, would change the supply cycle so that it would decriminalize the production in such a way so that the criminal activities in places like Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Afghanistan would dry up. And as a consequence, the revenue, the illegal revenue, would become legal revenue, would be controlled by governments rather than by criminal elements. And we would dry up the source of revenue that is acting to support our adversaries around the world. Give it some thought.